Let's talk about Steve's story and how this ties into everything we've been talking about.
Yeah. As I already mentioned, I was a newborn intensive care specialist, but I became interested in Alzheimer's because of my husband. And so Steve was an accountant and he worked at home from my medical practice. I was working strictly in a hospital. We didn't have an outside office, so he was able to work from home. He took care of our children. It was why we could have children. We felt, that he was able to stay home with them. And so I'm very grateful to him for that. And um, so Steve, was working as an accountant. Very active guy. He was always reading. He loved kayaking. He was always out in the yard working. But when he was 51, he started having memory issues that were just getting worse and worse. He started procrastinating on doing tax reports that should have, quarterly reports that should have taken 20 minutes. He was using a computer. He would take days to get them done and missing deadlines and, problems like that. And then he started forgetting if he'd been to the bank and the post office. And he was only 51 at this point. And that was disturbing. I was 2 years younger than him. And I couldn't imagine that I would forget if I'd been to the bank and the post office. And he started misplacing important mail, checks from patients, things like that. And so he saw a neuropsychiatrist, and he was also depressed at the time. And the doctor felt that his memory problems were most likely related to depression, and started him on an antidepressant. Well, Steve kept getting worse and worse, and by 2004, he was having all kinds of problems. He couldn't remember. We had moved from where we had lived for a long time to another smaller town about an hour north. He could not remember the streets. And it was a very small town, very simple. He couldn't remember that. He would get lost. He went to the dentist, he got horribly lost. And, other problems like that were happening. He spent endless hours in his garage looking for something. I'd come home the end of the day, he would still be looking and he couldn't remember what he's even looking for, but he was still looking for it. Just weird behavior. And so I found out about a neurologist that kind of specialized in Alzheimer's and dementia. I was worried about that. And he tested him and he said he did have dementia and followed him about 6 months later. He was continuing to get worse and he believed that he had Alzheimer's disease and started him on medications, which didn't do anything. We didn't see any change from that. And by 2008, Steve was no longer able to drive for at least a couple years, couldn't turn on a computer, couldn't use the calculator, couldn't even do simple math. So he had declined very substantially during that time, and I really felt like I was gonna lose him within, 2 or 3 years, most likely. And, we happened I was always watching the Alzheimer's research, trying to find out if there are any new drugs, whatever, and there were 2 new drug trials, in our area that became available to and, there hadn't been any, for several years. So I was able to arrange screenings for him 2 days in a row, and, there were 2 different drugs in 2 different locations, and both of them were designed to remove plaques from the brain. Just a different way of doing it. One was intravenous, one was an oral medication. And, the night before the first screening, I got on the internet to try to look at the risks and the benefits of the 2 drugs, and I came across a press release about a medical food that was in development. It was still about a year away from coming out on the market, but they had had 2 successful studies. One was a pilot study in which people with Alzheimer's were either given this, they called it AC-1202 on one visit, or a placebo, which had none of that in it, on another day. And what they found was that when they got this AC-1202, that 9 out of the 20 people had improvement in their memory and cognition. And none of the drugs have ever for Alzheimer's have ever been able to claim that they improve memory or cognition. The most that they've been able to claim is that they slow it down, for a period of time. So this was intriguing to me, and so I had to find out what it was because they didn't really spell it out in the press release, and I was able to find their patent application, And that is where I learned about this problem of insulin resistance in the brain. They actually started calling it type 3 diabetes, um, because this could happen in people that didn't have type 1 or type 2 diabetes. And and it talked all about this what we've talked about, ketones, and that when you consume medium chain fatty acids, that they're taken up and converted to ketones, and their idea was that taking medium chain triglycerides, taking MCT oil could help, improve memory and cognition in somebody with Alzheimer's. So, I thought this was just intriguing, and, I remembered, this thing from the 1960s. I had learned this in biochemistry in medical school about starvation. During fasting and starvation, the brain can use ketones, and that medium chain fatty acids are converted to ketones. So I thought, okay, the science makes sense to me, that this is possible. And um, so, at this point, it's like 1 a.m. The screening's at 9 a.m. And so I didn't have time to do anything about it, which was kind of cool, as it turns out, kind of fortunate. So Steve went for his first screening, and he needed to score at least 16 points on a 30-point test, memory test called the mini mental status exam, to qualify for the study. And he only got 14 points, so he didn't qualify. And we were really disappointed. We'd been waiting for years for a study, and the doctor asked him to draw a clock. I'm going to try to show this to you. So this is the clock that he drew. And you can see it doesn't look anything like a clock.
Yeah, for somebody listening, some circles that are displaced and just a couple of numbers here and there. Very erratic.
Yeah, no, very erratic, no full circle for the clock. And it was very disorganized. And the doctor said that he was on the verge of severe Alzheimer's. And so I kind of knew that already. But on the way home, I thought, okay, what I had learned from the patent application too was that MCTs are extracted from coconut oil. I didn't even know that when I was in neonatology, taking care of these tiny babies getting MCT oil. But it said it came from coconut oil. I thought, well, I've seen coconut oil in health food stores. So we stopped at one on the way home. And when we got home, I was able to find the fatty acid composition of coconut oil and reminded myself which are the medium chain fatty acids. And I figured out that coconut oil was about 60%, 60% medium chain fatty acids. And so I figured out to equal the medical dose, the medical food dose that they were using, that it would take a little over 2 tablespoons of coconut oil. They had also another study, 152 people that were in the study for 90 days and some for 6 months, that also half of them had improvement in their memory and cognition that was sustained over a long period of time. So I thought, okay, this is reasonable to do. And so the next morning, he was scheduled for the second screening, different location, different center, different city. Sorry, I need a sip of water myself here in a minute. And he went this time, but I gave him 2 tablespoons of coconut oil. I put it in some oatmeal to warm because it was warm and it melted very quickly. I took it too. I thought I'm not going to make him take anything I won't take. And 4 hours later, he was at the center and had his the mini mental status exam, and this time he scored 18 points, 14 the day before, now 18, 4 points, which is a really big change from the day before. And the things that he remembered were the season of the year that he couldn't remember the day before, the day of the week, which was different, the town we were in that was different, and the floor we were on in the institution where he was. And he got all of those right, and he hadn't gotten them right the day before. So he qualified for the study, and I wasn't really sure, was this just really good luck, or was this really happening, that he responded, to this taking coconut oil. And I thought, well, I'm going to keep it going. And I started, one of the things I read in the patent application was that when you take MCT oil, in this case, it was a pure C8 MCT oil, 8 carbons long, that the ketone levels peaked at about 90 minutes on average. and were gone back to 0 at 3 hours. But they were only studying 1 dose a day, and I thought, "Wait a minute, the brain needs fuel 24/7, and it's actually very active when we're sleeping and continues to need fuel, throughout the night." So, I thought, "Well, I'm gonna give him this, a little over 2 tablespoons every morning, but I'm gonna start adding it to other meals." I started adding it to lunch and to dinner, any snacks that we had, and everything in our house became coconut, basically. The very next day, I got all of these recipes. I got them online. I got coconut oil books from health food stores, things like that, and, just started, very adaptable to the foods that we eat here in the US, and many parts of the world, pretty much anywhere. So I just started including it, with other meals, cooking with it. You can cook it relatively kind of low to medium low heat with it. If it smokes, it ruins it. um, but he just every day we were seeing improvements, and he told me that the day that he started taking the coconut oil, he felt like a light bulb came on in his head. He actually felt better. He felt like he was very well. He had Alzheimer's. He was very depressed, at that time, and that turned around very quickly. And he had some physical symptoms. He walked very slowly, very sluggishly. He couldn't really pick his feet up very well. He couldn't run at all at that point. And over about 2 months, his gait completely normalized. The first few days even, he was able to walk faster, and he had tremors in his hands when he tried to eat, and he had a tremor in his jaw when he tried to talk, and the jaw tremor went away immediately. We never saw it again. His hand tremor, he would have it a little bit in the morning when he first woke up, and it would go away after he had coconut oil. And, so he started whistling, and he just looked more animated. People with Alzheimer's, they tend to have, some people describe it as a dead look in their face. But his face became more animated. He was smiling more. He was telling jokes. He was whistling, and all of this like in the first few days. And, we really felt like something dramatic had happened. And I started thinking about the other 35 million people they were saying at the time in the world that had, dementia. Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia. And as time went on, he just steadily was improving. And at about 2 weeks after he started taking it, he drew another clock. And you can see that this time it's a full circle. All the numbers are there. There's a couple little extra numbers, duplicates, and a whole bunch of lines. And then he did another one at 37 days. And this one's a little bit tidier looking. And I asked him, "What are all those lines about?" I thought they were hands of the clock. And he said, no, he was trying to line the numbers across from each other because he wanted it to look neat, tidy. He was discouraged that he didn't think it looked so great. But to me, it looked phenomenal compared to that clock that just had a few little tiny circles and a few numbers. So it was really quite an experience. And, like I said, at about 2 months, he was completely walking normally. He could run again. He could tie his shoes again. You can imagine how far into the disease he was if he couldn't tie his shoes. And then I started around 6 weeks or so, started adding some MCT oil as well. I found out I could get it online. First, I called the company that had made the oil, was making the oil that was in the clinical study, and they told me I would have to buy a minimum of, I think it was 16 55-gallon drums to buy it. But they sent me a sample. I said, we'll send you a sample." I told them what was up. And, you know, and then I found out I could get it online, and that there were fitness, health food stores that catered to bodybuilders, that they had carried it. And it wasn't, very common at that time. Now you can find it in pretty much any grocery store or drugstore. You can find MCT oil. Um, so I started mixing it. At this point, I had contacted Dr. Richard Veach. Was the world expert at the time on ketones, and he had been working on this problem. He was really the inspiration for this idea about the medium chain fatty acids and Alzheimer's. He was he started believing in the 1990s that there were therapeutic uses for ketones and wanted to find out what they were. And he hypothesized that Alzheimer's would be one of the diseases that would respond to this. And he also, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, Huntington's chorea, just a number of kind of rare genetic disorders. And, not to mention type 2 diabetes, that might improve, with this. And so, I made contact with him, and he was totally intrigued when he saw the two clocks, from the first day and 14 days later. He said that this is totally unexpected. He had been developing a ketone ester, and he thought you would need, his ketone ester could easily get 10 times higher ketone levels within 30 minutes compared to taking MCT oil or coconut oil. He actually measured these levels and found that his levels did go up a bit with coconut oil, but it wasn't like off the charts. It was relatively small levels. MCT oil, he also did levels with Steve, and it got higher. It was higher than with coconut oil. So he encouraged me to start using some MCT oil, and so I started making a mixture of coconut and MCT oil, and I kept cooking with virgin coconut oil as well. Um, and I kind of came up with a 4-to-3 ratio of MCT oil to coconut oil, and we were using the CHC10, which is the most commonly available MCT oil. And it's liquid at room temperature. You can use it in almost any food. It will mix into anything. You can use it on salad and soup, just many different ways you can use it, put it in a smoothie. And at about 3.5 months since after starting the coconut oil, Steve came to me one day and he said he could read again. And he hadn't been able to read for about a year and a half. And it turned out well, a lot of it was basically a physical problem in a way, possibly something happening in his brain. But he told me that when he would look at a page, he said the words would break up into pixels. He described it as like pixels in satellite breakup, which to me, that somebody with Alzheimer's could describe it that way was really quite interesting. But and he said that that had stopped. It was like the words would shake around on the page, and that had stopped, and that he could read again. And then around 9 or 10 months, he started remembering what he'd read several hours earlier in the day. So he basically continued to have steady improvement, probably for about 10 months or so before he leveled off. And it was just phenomenal. He improved so much that he was able to work as a volunteer in the supply warehouse at the hospital where I worked. He would put stickers on supplies, and he'd help with delivery. Somebody always went with him, but delivering supplies to the different units in the hospital. And that made him feel very useful again. You just can't imagine what that did for him emotionally, and really helped lift his depression. And um, you mentioned you mentioned psychiatric illnesses, before, and ketones. And one of the things about Alzheimer's is there are psychiatric symptoms in people that have Alzheimer's disease. Steve started with depression. That was one his earliest symptom that was noticeable to me. And that's really common, for people to have a lifelong history of depression before they develop Alzheimer's. And anxiety can become very severe in Alzheimer's. Behavioral disturbances, hallucinations, things that are associated with schizophrenia are common in Alzheimer's. So, there's some overlap in a way in those diseases, or they intersect, the symptoms. And, so, that improved, dramatically for him. And then he did get into the clinical trial. He got into both of them. He went back and tested for the other one. And the second time he tested for the first study, his mini mental status exam improved to 20 points. It had been 14, then 18, then 20, so he had continued to improve, and he got accepted into the study. And we found out later that he was on the placebo for 18 months. it was a crossover study, so you would either be on the drug or the placebo in the beginning and then cross over after 18 months, and, we didn't know that he was on it, but so, in the very beginning, I wasn't 100% sure if it was just the coconut oil or if this drug had something to do with it, but he was on the coconut oil for 2 months and had all those improvements before he ever started the study, so and they allowed him in, we talked about it. One of the center that he ended up, choosing, the drug, they, had done the study of AC-1202, they had participated in that, so they were well aware of it and let him be in this study anyway. They said, "Just don't change anything, from this point out." So, basically, we pretty much kept him on the same amount of, like, coconut and MCT oil, but so he steadily improved, and then shortly after that 18-month mark, he started having some new weird symptoms, and he had, his hair started growing out a different color, which was a sign of that drug that they were seeing with, most of the people on the drug, their hair color changed, and he had some other strange symptoms, and he fainted and, abrasion that wouldn't heal for a month, that type of thing. It was really odd, and, when he fainted, I decided, "Okay, we've gotta get him out of the study," and, it turned out a few months later, we were notified that this drug actually caused worsening of Alzheimer's disease. It accelerated it instead of improving it. And so he was on this for about 6 weeks, the medication we found out later. And he had a setback during that time. And Dr. Veach, we'd kept in contact all this time. He has ketone ester. In the meantime, they had finished toxicity studies. They had very, very few, mostly, always all of them minor, like stomach upset or something like that, with the ketone ester. And he told me he had taken it himself for a year to make sure it wouldn't kill anybody, was how he put it. And so he suggested that we give it to Steve, and that Steve, that we do a pilot study of one person with Alzheimer's taking his ketone ester, and he felt good about me doing it because I'm a physician, that if there was a problem, I would recognize it. So um, one day, this big container of Dr. Veach's ketone ester showed up on our doorstep. It was the raw material. It tasted absolutely horrible, like jet fuel. It's fuel. It is fuel. And it tasted just horrible. And, so I had to kinda they, the chemist suggested that I dilute it. Todd King, he made all of this drop by drop every day, and, suggested diluting it and trying to flavor it in some way, and I tried so many different things, and, but Steve, he started taking it, and even the very first day, 2 hours after he took this, he was able to sing and write out the alphabet, which he hadn't been able to do for months. And, he tried over and over for 20 minutes, and just that he could persist for 20 minutes trying to write out the alphabet, to me, was really quite surprising, and he actually did it. And, I tape recorded him, videotaped him for, about 2 hours, and he was euphoric. He was so happy. He started talking about memories, from his childhood that he had never even told me about ever, about his first grade teacher, that he blamed his horrible penmanship on her when he was writing out the alphabet. It was really something, and, then, over about 6 weeks, like, the new symptoms that he had kinda related to Alzheimer's all disappeared, basically completely reversed, and he was stable for another 20 months, before he had a problem again, and, sadly, altogether, we got almost 4 better good years, better than the year before he started taking the coconut oil, and, then one day, I had a lady that stayed with him when I went to the hospital to work, and, he hugged me, told me he loved me, kissed me goodbye, and 5 minutes later, she called me, and, he had collapsed, he had fallen straight back, and he went into a seizure. He had an extremely long, like a 20-minute seizure. He had stopped breathing, he turned blue. When I got home, I was 5 minutes away, and when I got home, he was still blue. EMS wasn't there yet, and he had another seizure on the way to the hospital, and, sadly, he become completely dependent after that. He, had a brain injury, and he didn't have a stroke. I thought maybe that's what had happened, but he had a CAT scan. It didn't show anything like that. But the seizure, caused damage, probably the lack of oxygen, and he was completely dependent. And he's still, we kept giving him everything, the ketone ester and the coconut and MCT oil. But he did pass away about 2.5 years later. And one of the interesting things, people that and he died from Alzheimer's disease. He basically just became unconscious and didn't wake up from it. But um, he was physically completely normal from the neck down. People with Alzheimer's, when they die from it, they usually stop eating and drinking, and they become emaciated. They become very thin. And he wasn't at all. He was just a normal body weight. He had been eating really well up until that happened, and I feel like he maybe had a better quality of life, given his condition, than if we had not used that. He probably would have died sooner, I believe. But it really, between the coconut, MCT oil, and ketone ester, it bought him almost 4 better years. And if somebody had cancer, that would be a phenomenon, phenomenal, that to gain almost 4 extra years of life. So, it was well worth it. And, our family really appreciated it. And, so that's basically the story. It's a long story.
Thank you for sharing all that. To make sure I have the timeline correct, you started with the coconut oil, saw profound changes that day and beyond. 6 weeks in, you introduced MCT oil.
Yeah, saw continued improvement, and we were increasing it too a little bit because you only tolerate so much at a time, so increasing it slowly worked very well.
And he kept improving for months. Then he went into the clinical trial.
Mhm.
For the first period of time, he was getting the placebo, so that wasn't affecting him negatively. But then when he got on the drug, he started to decline. You guys had to leave the trial. Was that when the ketones, exogenous ketone esters came in? After, when he was recovering from the drug trial?
Yeah, it was, because of what happened during the drug trial that Dr. Beach decided, because of his setback, he decided that this would be a good time to try it with Steve, to see if it would help him improve again, and it did. It substantially helped him improve, and we had continued the coconut and MCT oil too. It's just these higher ketone levels, which were, uh, you know, 10 times higher than what we were getting with the coconut and MCT oil. 30 minutes after he would take it, his level would just go way up. And, we could clearly see a difference the very first day. And all the new symptoms, that happened, related to that drug, all were erased over about 6 weeks. Most of them the first few days. I mean, for example, he right before he started taking the ketone ester, he had needed a lot of assistance with taking a shower, shaving, brushing his teeth. I had to stand with him. This was kind of a new thing too at that time, and I had to stand with him and talk him through taking a shower step by step because he didn't remember what to do. That's what happens with Alzheimer's. It's a slow process, but I would have to tell him, "Okay, wet your hair. Okay, put the shampoo in your hand. Okay, now put it in your hair. Now rub it. Now, okay, rinse your hair out." Every step of taking a shower, and then the same thing with shaving and brushing his teeth. The very next day after he started taking the ketone ester, he came out. I was already up. He comes out in the morning. He had taken a shower. He had picked all the clothes out from his house. He had shaved. He had his glasses on. He had done all of that just spontaneously on his own without any assistance. It was that dramatic. It was really a big deal.
So you mentioned 6 weeks to get over the setbacks of the drug. Do you feel subjectively after that with the ketone ester, and I think you mentioned he was still taking the MCT and the coconut oil at that time, do you feel like he was better off at that 6 week point and beyond for a period of time than he was before the trial? Well, before the drug actually part of the trial.
I think he basically it brought him back up to the same level, I would say, and then he was very stable, he had, with the coconut and MCT, he improved for about 9 or 10 months, and then it kinda leveled off, we didn't see too much new changes, but then, the ketone ester, with the drug, it dropped him down, and the ketone ester brought him back up to that same level again, I would say.
And were you testing ketones before, during, and after the trial to compare his levels?
We did a whole lot of testing in the beginning to try to figure out what dose he would need. Dr. Veach wanted him to get up to a certain point, like a ketone level, like with coconut and MCT, it might be around zero point 0.5 or 1 millimole. Um, his ester could get it up to 5 millimoles in 30 minutes with the right dose. And so we tested different doses. And at that point, home monitors were available to be able to test blood ketones at home. Up until then, for home, it was basically urine test strips, and they didn't measure beta hydroxybutyrate, which is the main ketone, and it is the ketone that is in the ketone ester, so we could now measure blood samples, for beta hydroxybutyrate at home with strips. So this was like perfect timing. And so we tested a variety of different doses, and he really wanted him to get up to 4 to 5 millimoles. He thought that's what it would take to kind of maximize the effect. And so we found for Steve it was around 25 grams, which is a lot of ketone ester, and he was getting it 3 times a day, that much 3 times a day. So that would get his level up to about 3.5 or 4 millimoles. But, you're also producing acetoacetate, which that blood test isn't measuring, and that's about another 25%, so he was probably getting ketones well above, 4 millimoles every time he took this. And so he was getting it 3 times a day. And at one point we tried I tried giving it to him during the night, but he would just wake up, and that was we were done for he was just up. So that didn't work out so well, his level would be lowish in the morning. It would be well, most people have like a 0 or maybe zero point 0.1 millimole level in the morning, and Steve's would be around zero point 0.4, which wasn't very high, before he started taking these products. So Dr. Beach, he thought if we gave it in the middle of the night, maybe that would help. But part of the reason is that your body, there's kind of a surge in cortisol, you know, um, in the early morning when you first wake up, and that causes your glucose level to go up, which would make your ketone level tend to go down, so that's probably why his level was relatively low in the morning, despite the diet that he was on. A lot of people on a ketogenic diet have low levels in the morning too, and then they go up as the day goes on, so that's kind of how we worked with the ester. And he was, Dr. Beach was at the NIH, and he had so much budget per year for this ketone ester. So each year, um, around, well, October 1st was their new year, fiscal year, when he would get new money, to start making this. But towards that last couple months, he couldn't really make any more. He would run out of money to make it, and I had to start stretching out what we had left, so he would get maybe 1 dose a day instead of 3 doses a day, for a couple months. And so we did see a little bit of like not so great, during that time, that things seemed to be declining a little bit. But that was more, that first 20. That's why one reason I say 20 months, that he was sustained after that, because when he didn't get as much of it later, we would see some decline as well. And then he had the seizure that changed everything.
Were ketone salts available at the time? And was that
No,
something you played with? No.
No, it wasn't available. Steve, he did pass away from Alzheimer's in early 2016, and, just a couple weeks later is when the ketone salts were launched, and, that was really quite something too, and the ketone ester didn't come on the market until 2018. So Steve, we were just it was just amazing to me that we got to be the first that he was the first person with Alzheimer's to get to take this, and it was extremely expensive for Dr. Veach to make it too, and we didn't have to pay for it, which was also incredible. So, um, it was really quite something, and then they put it out, Dr. Kieran Clark in the UK at Oxford was studying his ketone ester. They were kind of partners in this, and, she was studying it for athletic, um, fitness, basically, and, it was originally the first grants for this ketone ester were from the Department of Defense in the US. They wanted to see if it would, enhance the cognitive and physical performance of the troops, and, when these men, well, I shouldn't just say men, but, when they go out on, you know, uh, some of their activities, it can be extended, it can be days or weeks, and, there's only so much food that they can bring with them, and Beach believed that this ketone ester might help keep them sharper and, provide fuel if they don't have food, say, for a day or 2. They might not, they might run out, um, so they had gotten a $5 million grant to study this ketone ester, to develop it and then study it. So, Dr. Clark was doing, really looking at the cognitive and physical athletic performance, which would equate to what the troops, might need it for. And she was studying Olympic rowers, they were the rowing teams. And so there were a couple of Olympics there that they got it. They were getting it. And it wasn't a banned substance. It's naturally produced in your body. It's the same exact ketone. Um, but, they did really well, during the Olympics those years. But they found that, there were, I think, 11 rowers and 9 of them broke their own records when they took the ketone ester, which was really quite amazing, and one of them broke a world record, when they took it, and she did all kinds of other testing, with the athletes. They did muscle biopsies and all kinds of things like that to see how well it would, affect recovery, from, intense exercise and that type of thing. So their idea, Veach had a really serious problem getting funding for a clinical trial of Alzheimer's or anything else. Um, and the thing, like Alzheimer's research was less than a $500 million a year that they were spending on it at the time. They were spending 9 billion a year on cancer and a $500 million on Alzheimer's. And when you divide that up amongst all the Alzheimer's researchers in the United States, that doesn't leave much, to do, a study for, Alzheimer's and his ketone ester. He couldn't get funding for it, and he couldn't get it mass produced. He was literally making it drop by drop in his lab. So they had the idea of getting it out as a sports drink. And, the first toxicity testing that they did was in athletes. It was in younger people and athletes for 28 days, and then eventually they did another toxicity study for adults of all ages, like ages 20 to 70, and for 28 days, and like they had over 2,000 doses, and they had 6 episodes of mild, adverse reactions being diarrhea or stomach upset. That was it, which was really incredible. But they got it out as a sports drink in 2018, and there are several ketone esters out there now. Ketonate is the one that is here in the U.S. that is Dr. Veach's ester, as it was made in his lab. And Dr. Veach sadly passed away in 2020, right at the beginning of 2020, at age 84. And, he was working at the NIH up till that very last moment that he passed away. It was really, something, and, so, my husband and I, my whole family really owes a lot to him too, for what he did for us and allowing Steve to be that first person with Alzheimer's to get it, and, now, I've been told by the people that make, well, that, particular product that about 30% of people who are buying it have some kind of neurological disorder or, a medical, a disorder, that they are taking it for. It's not FDA approved for any specific disorders yet because the studies just haven't been done yet. But, about 70% are using it for, fitness or weight loss or, that type of thing. Or just using it because they are eating a lower carb diet to kind of supplement that to try to increase their ketone levels. And like I said, there's a few other products out on the market now that are called ketone esters.
For somebody brand new to exogenous ketones, after hearing this, wanting to experiment, I quickly mentioned the salts. How do you look at the salts versus the esters?
I take both. I like both of them. There's different reasons, there's different price points. The ester tends to be quite a bit more expensive. But it's more powerful, I would say. It gets the ketone levels much higher than the ketone salts do, both increase ketones fairly quickly, but the ketone ester, you can easily get up to 4 or 5 millimoles, and, with ketone salts, it might be zero point 0.5 or 1 or maybe 1.5 millimoles that it would increase it from where you start. So I kind of look at it, I suggest, that people use coconut and MCT, think of it as part of their diet. It's a food. These are oils, use it in your food, which will help maintain a pretty steady level, mild level of ketosis. If you do an overnight fast, add coconut and or MCT oil. I do put both in my coffee every morning. Um, it will further boost your ketone levels, and then, I usually don't have anything solid to eat until 12 or 1 o'clock in, the afternoon, so that can help further increase your ketone levels, and as you continue fasting, that will increase your ketone levels. Exercise, increases ketones. Moderately vigorous exercise for a half hour or so will increase ketones for quite a few hours. So there are other things you can do, but I think of that coconut and MCT as part of the diet, and then the supplements, to further boost ketone levels if you want to do that. And, so I usually take some kind of ketone exogenous supplement twice a day, and I kind of mix it up. I try not to play favorites, with the different companies, but, um I might take, the ketone ester in the morning. Usually, I kinda take it a little bit mid-morning, and then, in the afternoon, I make an interesting drink. When you're on a ketogenic diet, it's hard to get enough fiber, and there's a tendency to get constipated for some people. And, but fiber can be helpful with that. But fiber is a carbohydrate, and, it might make your ketone levels go down. So I've actually kind of experimented with this, and I make a drink now where I put, fiber with, the ketone salts, and then I put some MCT oil powder in it, and it my ketone level doesn't drop at all. When I do this, it actually goes up, and I can get my fiber at the same time. In addition to, the fiber that you get at meals with vegetables and that kind of thing. But it's just hard to get enough, if you're on a pretty strict ketogenic diet.
And when Steve was going through his Alzheimer's journey, what was his diet? Was he ketogenic, low carb?
He was pretty ketogenic. We had started, like, 2 years before the coconut oil was in 2008, and about 2 years earlier, up until that point, we were eating what I call the convenience food diet. We were eating a lot of ultra-processed foods. I'd get these packaged meals from Sam's that had complete meals that you could throw in the microwave, and really terrible diet, and, we'd eat a lot of fast foods and that kind of thing. And then in 2006, I read that, people with Alzheimer's that ate the most Mediterranean-like diet on average lived 4 years longer than people that ate the least Mediterranean-like diet, and it never occurred to me that Alzheimer's had anything to do with nutrition up to that point. And so that, was kind of another aha moment, I guess you might say. And, so I started reading up on all different types of diets and, including the Mediterranean diet, and we kinda settled on that, and we basically like, completely switched over from a really poor diet, the sad, standard American diet, high carb diet. I was hungry all the time. I would eat bowls of cereal for breakfast and wanted another one, and at me in the evening and wanted another one, and, um, it was basically a whole food diet, all whole grains, no, white flour or white rice, and, meant much more vegetables. I didn't think I even liked vegetables up to that point, but when I started making them, I found out they actually taste pretty good, and I really liked them. We were eating more salmon. Our main oils became butter and olive oil, at that point, before the coconut oil, and, you know, um, basically a much healthier diet. And Steve, is he continued to develop symptoms, over those next 2 years. He did get quite a bit worse, and I have no idea if it actually slowed it down or not. It's really hard to know because we had no point of comparison, but I benefited greatly from it. I lost about 60 pounds, which I've managed to keep off. My sugar cravings went away in probably 3 days. I was always thinking about my next meal, and that stopped, which was great. And I felt like, well, when we added the coconut and MCT oil, I started doing it every day too. I have Alzheimer's is very strong on one side of my family and also on the other side. And I thought if it could help somebody with Alzheimer's, maybe it could also prevent it. So I started taking the coconut and MCT oil as well back then. But when we added, you know, eating the Mediterranean diet, greatly reduced our carbohydrate intake like right away. And we were eating these low glycemic foods instead of, sugary sweets and, packaged foods that had high fructose corn syrup and that kind of thing in it. So we were already on a lower carb diet, but when we added the fat and as it was increased, um, well, in the very beginning, Steve started gaining a few pounds, and I realized you can't just add something like that to your diet and not subtract something else. But he just kind of spontaneously quit eating so much fruit, and we were already on the Mediterranean diet. But he also started leaving the pasta and the bread, rice, anything like that. He really wasn't eating it, so I just kind of stopped putting it on his plate, and so he was effectively on a ketogenic diet, probably within a couple months of starting the oils, maybe even sooner. Um, and so, he was on a ketogenic diet really for the rest of his life. And it was about 8 years, from when he first started the coconut oil until he passed away. So we really gained, probably quite a bit of time. He was declining rapidly when we started this, and it completely, pushed him in the other direction, which was incredible.
Okay, so keto-ish diet, MCT oil, coconut oil. Later on, introducing the ketone esters. Any other supplements along his journey that he played around with for brain health? And did you find any of them worked?
Yeah. Before we started, probably around the time that we started the Mediterranean diet, there was a study that was going to take place of DHA. So that's the omega-3 fatty acid that's in fish, that's very abundant in the brain, very important to the brain. And when I read the study, they were either going to get placebo or 900 milligrams of DHA, and I thought, this is an essential fatty acid. Why should we be in a study and risk getting the placebo? So I just started giving it to him. You can get it over the counter. It just didn't seem logical to for him to enter a study, for that. We added DHA probably 2 years before we started the coconut oil. Obviously, it didn't make him improve. And we tried other things too. I had read about um, acetyl. Let's see, coenzyme Q10 and acetyl L-carnitine, which is actually, like for longer chain fats, that the carnitine helps transport it into cells better. Um, and magnesium, it's very important. It's and certain B vitamins that are involved in production of ATP, and magnesium is as well. So those were some supplements that seemed logical for him to take, and, vitamin D, is another one that's very important. So, basically, he was taking those and, I did experiment with other ones. The only other supplement that I ever felt like I saw a difference was when he started taking D-ribose, and, ribose is a sugar molecule. It's made inside of cells. It's not something, it's made from glucose within cells, and ribose becomes part of DNA, RNA, and the ATP molecule. So it's needed to make those very special things that we can't live without, basically. And I had seen a lecture by Dr. Stephen Sinatra. He's a cardiologist, and he is a big fan of coconut oil, interestingly. But he had um, basically done a lot of research showing that coenzyme Q10, for example, could help somebody who becomes depleted in people that take statins. It can be the levels can become very low, CoQ10. It's another thing that's very important to producing ATP. And supplementing with CoQ10 seemed to help people with congestive heart failure improve. So that's kind of where he got started with it, and then he added the, acetyl-carnitine, magnesium, and D-ribose, and I heard a lecture, this was probably around 2009, about a year and a half or 2 after Steve no, it was yeah, about a year and a half after Steve started, the coconut oil, and, so I started giving Steve D-ribose, and he seemed to have improvements in his conversational skills. He was able to sustain a conversation better and more smoothly, if that makes any sense, and that seemed like within a few days, I saw that difference in him. So, we kept that going too, so there were other things like that, that I felt were important, just your basic vitamins, making sure you get adequate vitamins, and, choline is another one, s acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter in the brain that has to do with memory and learning, and it has a lot of other functions too. It's also deficient in Alzheimer's, and choline is some nutritionists think it should be a vitamin. It's very important, but about half of Americans get less than half of what the recommended daily allowance is. And it's something that's very abundant in eggs, for example. It's in liver, it's in meats, it's in some vegetables, but in smaller amounts. Um, so I really felt that, it was important for him to get choline, and, the easiest way to do that is to eat eggs. So Steve got a lot of eggs, and, he, the interesting thing, people ask about his cholesterol level. Wasn't it off the charts? It should have been off the charts, right? Well, Steve had a high cholesterol level before we started all of this. And over time, his level came down to normal. His HDL went way up. It almost doubled when we started the coconut oil, which is a known thing about coconut oil. And increasing HDL is a good thing. His triglycerides were very low, never over 60 or 70, despite all that fat in his diet. And his total and LDL cholesterol came down. They were above normal, and they actually slowly came down below normal, and even more so, like when he started taking the ketone ester, which was quite the opposite of what people who don't like coconut oil would have predicted.
Mary, I know you got to go soon, so we're going to end on this. It's obvious as you share Steve's story the improvements he had. When it comes to prevention versus reversal in Alzheimer's, how do you look at all this?
Well, if you're already having a problem, obviously, it's worth trying, for reversal. And, I've had many people communicate with me over the years. I even put out a study of 288 people that had memory impairment that, took coconut or MCT oil, and about 90% of them improved. These were people that had written to me, so they were more likely to write, I think, if they had improvement, but it was quite a few people that I got, really interesting emails from, and some of their experiences were quite profound, how much they improved. So I think, that somebody who already has a problem, it's definitely worth trying, and even, Steve was well into the disease. He was there's 7 stages of Alzheimer's, and he was between stage 5 and 6 when we started doing this, and it took him back probably to stage 3 or 4, you know? He didn't it wasn't a complete cure, but he was able to function quite a bit better, when we did this. Um, but, we have that worry, are we one of those people that already has decreased glucose uptake in our 30s or 20s or 30s or 40s and more and more people get diabetes, as we age too, which has tremendous, terrible complications, if you have it for years. There are many different reasons, metabolic disorders that you can prevent by adopting this diet as soon as possible. Really, and you can prevent a lot of problem, I think, by doing this. And like I said, there's a range of ketogenic diets, and to get started, I tell people, you know, uh, if you don't, a lot of people say, I can't give up bread. There's no way I can give up bread. Um, I say, cut your carbohydrate portions in half, the pasta, the breads, the rice, cereals, things like that. Cold cereals are probably just get rid of them. Maybe eat whole grain oatmeal if you want to eat a cereal. Um, After you cut this portion in half and you get used to that, cut it in half again. Eat about a quarter of what you used to eat. And there's value to that. Dr. Cunane that I mentioned earlier, he just recently did a study. It should be published soon, if it might already be. It was in a care home where what with the people living there, they continued their usual breakfast and then they cut their portions of carbs in half for lunch and dinner. Their blood sugars dropped by 40%. 40% just from cutting the portions in half. So just right there, could make a big difference. And then, trying to convert, shift from refined grains, like whole wheat, not whole wheat, white flour, white rice to whole grain flour, like whole wheat flour. If you eat anything with flour at all, I tend not to so much, except maybe an occasional treat. Phenomenal bread at a restaurant, I might have a piece of that, but whole grain rice, other whole grains, um, and, kind of taking that approach, get rid of obvious sweets, get rid of sugary beverages, which are very harmful to the brain. They're very inflammatory.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
It has been shown since the 1980s that insulin resistance, basically a problem with glucose uptake in the brain, is a big problem for people with Alzheimer's disease. And this is true for many other neurodegenerative disorders. Insulin resistance is a big